Okay, so The Silence of the Lambs is a 1991 American thriller adapted from a Thomas Harris novel by the same name. In the film, a young FBI trainee named Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, is tasked by her superiors to conduct an interview with Dr. Hannibal Lecter, played by Anthony Hopkins, a brilliant psychiatrist and cannibalistic serial killer being held in a prison for the criminally insane. Meanwhile, another serial killer nicknamed Buffalo Bill, played by Ted Levine, has begun kidnapping young women and skinning their corpses. Starling continues to talk with Lecter, believing his insights into psychopathic behavior might be useful in apprehending Bill, but Lecter only agrees to help her if she talks to him about her personal thoughts and feelings. I think what's frightening about Silence of the Lambs is its reoccurring depictions of enclosure and being trapped. Characters find themselves in crowded elevators, in grim funeral homes, in delivery vans, in abandoned storage garages, in darkened basements, in prison cells, in cages, and at the bottom of wells. The deranged killer Buffalo Bill even feels trapped in his own wretched skin and dreams of one day shedding it like a cocoon and taking flight as a brilliant butterfly. It's a very disturbing film, a very graphic film, not necessarily for its depictions of violence, we're usually only privy to the aftermath of various crimes, but more for the implications of these acts, the terrifying pathology behind the violence. The characters are fascinating on their own, but even more so when they're in dialogue with one another. The scenes between Starling and Lecter are particularly entrancing, both for their writing and the chemistry of the performers. Their first encounter is like a descent into hell as Starling makes her way from the mundane office ground floor of a Baltimore psychiatric prison and into a practically medieval dungeon, its walls awash with red neon light. Demme's use of extreme close-ups give us a genuine sense of the hidden fears and desires at work on Hopkins and Foster's faces. The cinematography is also about us moving closer to Lecter, physically and emotionally. We are forced to look evil in the eyes, as it were, and not flinch away. Like Starling, we are made vulnerable by our own fascination with these monsters. Lecter is a walking contradiction of refined intellect, cruel wit, menacing playfulness, and remorseless savagery. The danger for Starling is not a physical danger, but a psychological one. In her efforts to understand the workings of an evil mind and save Bill's most recent victim, she is forced to open herself up to be studied by evil. Did everyone else get a chance to see this movie?
Oh,
It's
yes, I saw it twice.
No, it's one of my favorite movies. It's one of the best book to movies adaptations that I can think of, and it's sort of the book that sent me down Thomas Harris's writing, because I've read all of his books and he's one of my favorite authors.
Yeah, I've read Red Dragon, but I haven't. I only started Silence of the Lambs, but I enjoyed what I read, and I agree he's a really interesting writer, very suspenseful, thrilling writing.
He's I've actually met him a couple times. He lived near the bookstore I work at, and he is the nicest, most soft-spoken Southern gentleman. And it's so weird because he came in one day and he was looking over this like anatomy book of 18th century like medical texts, and he's like, "Oh, that's interesting." And we're just looking at him like, the guy who wrote Silence of the Lambs is looking at a medical text in our bookstore.
That's so cool.
He's like, "I'll
coming up with new ideas for dissecting bodies."
He's always thinking, but he's super nice. And he's just nothing like any of his characters. But it was kind of surreal to have that moment.
That's awesome.
It's just too bad that they forced him to write the prequel book to the Hannibal series. Yeah, I don't know. There was no book.
Always with the prequels.
Yeah,
it was still fun. It gave the backstory, and it was, the fact that the movie came out before the book doesn't bother me too much, or right around the same time.
Yeah,
but it was just fun to get in Lecter's head and find
exactly.
Out where
it doesn't take away anything from the original movies.
Just to comment on what you said in your summary about people being trapped. I think if we take the image of lambs being trapped inside a closed area, it's like sort of they're all meant to be innocent, but when we look at it in the film, at least most of the people that are being trapped are not. So I guess it's a nice juxtaposition.
Well, most of the examples are Starling, and of course the girl who gets kidnapped. So I would say, pretty innocent. I mean, obviously Lecter is evil, but
it's actually this is actually I don't know that Jodie Foster. Do you think that this is Jodie Foster's best role because I think she has. I mean, she has made some other films, but not ones that people maybe think of when they think of Jodie. I mean, when they think Jodie Foster, they think Silence of the Lambs probably first, right? It's
That I've seen. I think it's her best performance. Yeah.
It's up there. I mean, I really love Contact also. It's one of the few movies that I like
Oh,
better than the book, and I thought she was really great in Contact also.
and
Yeah, I find her accent kind of distracting in Silence of the Lambs, but I'm probably the only person that does.
Well, I mean, Lecter
that
does
was-
make a comment sort of at the beginning. He says like that accent you've tried so desperately
Yeah.
to shed. So maybe that's
Oh yeah, of course.
the kind
So
of
it's a
sort of
very-
supposed to be a bad accent. Yeah.
For me, it's a very affected accent that she
Sure.
has in this film.
Other question: Brian Cox or Anthony Hopkins? All right.
Well, I
so
mean,
it's,
That's the question. The Silence of the Lambs might be a sequel to a film from the 80s called Manhunter, which is a Michael Mann film,
yeah.
which was
This-
adapted from
adaptation
Red
of
Dragon,
Yeah.
the original movie. But most people seem to suggest that it's not, that Manhunter was a flop, and the people who made Silence of the Lambs didn't really make any obvious connections in the film or in marketing to associate it with Manhunter. That it's a
Yeah, well, Jack Graham is really the only connection aside from Lecter to Red Dragon, and he's really just in Silence of the Lambs to be Clarice's boss. And
sure.
he I don't even know if he references the that serial killer at any point in Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, there's no references to the Red Dragon
Yeah.
case, but I liked Manhunter for what it was. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as Silence of the Lambs. It's a much colder, more sort of police procedural film. There isn't any of that sort of gothic horror, I think, that Silence of the Lambs has. But I liked Cox's performance. It's very it's nowhere near as I don't know, playful or as charismatic. It's much more empty and cold, but it was interesting.
I
When
think
we
Mads
compare-
Mikkelsen is more scary looking than Anthony Hopkins, but like you say, well, obviously we're comparing different things, but Anthony Hopkins is very animated and really plays the role of Hannibal like really well.
I'm convinced Mads Mikkelsen is a serial killer, so I don't know how anyone on the show
Yeah.
doesn't realize
Well,
who
he
he
plays-
is.
I guess the only thing is that I would probably have to say that I prefer Brian Cox to
Oh,
the other ones.
get out of here!
No, because I think because I think it's not like he doesn't steal the film. That's the thing.
Yeah, it's
like
much smaller.
the film itself doesn't rely on Hannibal Lecter like the other ones do. In the sense that it's not about him. He's sort of
Yeah,
just
but when you
there to
when you
provide
think on it,
information, right?
Lecter's
And
Lecter's only on the screen for like 10 minutes maybe in the whole movie. It's not a it's his presence, but it's not he's not the main character in Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
no,
And I
of
think
course, but
that's-
it's like he became the icon for the film. Anthony Hopkins, like, I mean, I enjoyed him a lot in the film. It's just that I think that he maybe overshadowed the rest of the film a bit too much, probably because he's not actively like involved in the search for Buffalo Bill because he doesn't care in the end. It's just like he wants to get information about her. You know, he wants to get to know her.
I think he's absolutely involved in the search for Buffalo Bill. He's giving
Yeah.
her bits and pieces of information
Course.
in return for personal information from her. And I think
No, that's
ultimately
it.
the way
Yes.
she catches him is through Lecter's advice.
But that's not what he cares about. I mean, he just, I mean, in the end, he doesn't think that it's important. It's important because he can.
Sure.
he-
Yeah.
he-
It's a means to an
once
end. He's not emotionally
withdraws-
invested in whether they catch him. It's more about
Yeah.
getting his claws into Starling. But I think ultimately he does play a
I-
big role in the main central storyline.
I guess the only problem that I would have with the film is that it sort of presents most of this. I mean, at least what people associate with serial killers is like the mastermind who is sort of like untouchable and who operates from within a sort of a solidified fortress, right? A prison cell. Without actually having to leave the cell, and so this sort of thing it's like when you look at real life cases of serial killers, they're actually fairly dull and uninteresting people, right? They are people who have issues with probably rage issues and all that stuff, but here it's sort of like it's
The ones who got
theatrical
caught.
in the right way, I think, but at the same time it's not necessarily an accurate portrayal probably of
Well, I think
how
Buffalo
people-
Bill is kind of
yeah,
a classic
that's
serial
what I mean.
killer. I mean, he's
Yeah,
just kind of a loser,
Yeah,
whereas
and-
Hannibal is obviously kind of exceptional and shown as such. But I think Buffalo Bill is your classic kind of more realistic serial killer.
It's I don't know, he seems like I mean the actor, I don't know that I have seen him in a lot of stuff apart from this. But
He's been in a lot of stuff, but he's never. I mean, he was in Monk. He played.
He's the captain.
Chief in Monk for years.
He's in Heat.
He always plays like a cop or a government guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Ed Gein was a serial killer that actually did use the skin and body parts of his victims. So I think that's something.
But I guess he was more of a grave robber, wasn't he, as well? I mean, he just most of the stuff that was found in Ed Gein's house was from graves he robbed, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Buffalo Bill is a combination of a few serial killers. Ed Gein, who skinned victims, Ted Bundy, who would use a similar
pretend to be injured, right?
Of getting women, to help him into his van, and another guy called Gary Hednick, who kept women kidnapped in a pit in his basement. So it's a combination of. He's a more sort of textbook psychopath serial killer, whereas Lecter is much more this cinematic or this theatrical creation of the author. It's a larger than life, almost sort of vampire character that you can't really classify. It's very gothic. It's not really a sort of something you can understand in police procedural criminology terms.
What I like about Sons of the Lambs is that it's about a mystery that you actually know the answer to pretty quickly, and at least the film shows it to you. But then you have the escape of Hannibal Lecter and all that stuff, which I still find like when he's in the cell, like listening to music while the guy is trying to get away. It's like that's just really it's having fun with the material, and it's mastered the material enough, I guess, to the point that it can sort of allow itself to it feels like it flows really well. There are no scenes that feel forced necessarily in the way that it's presented. So I guess it's.
I agree completely with that. Something about this film is, I don't know, just digestible in a way that in some other horror films I don't think are. I have a much easier time watching this, and I think that, like you say, that's mostly just because it flows really well, and there's sort of a nice variety in the emotional tones there, and it's also just very interesting to watch as a sort of psychological thing, to watch these interactions between these characters. I find that to be the most interesting part. Just really good actors playing off each other.
It's also got a lot of like, not tropes, but just it's very quotable. I mean, a lot of horror movies are quotable in a bad way, but I mean, like the fava beans and like the whole lotion in the basket. Like at least once a week at work, like we keep our DVDs in these we're like passing the basket, and someone will go, "It puts it in the basket," something like that.
Yeah, that's the first thing I heard of this movie, and I had to watch after.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, or else it gets the hose. So we always work that in. But it's super dark, but there's some levity. Not in the film, but it's become lighter, I guess.
Well, that's the thing. I think a lot of films do enter the sort of pop culture, and then the lines become funny or cliche. But I think Silence of the Lambs somehow avoids that, because when you actually watch the film, those lines are still as sort of scary and terrifying as they're supposed to be. So I think it retains the sort of seriousness that it was intended to have.
I thought if I could save just one, but he was so heavy. It was so heavy. I didn't get more than a few miles when the sheriff's car picked me up. Rancher was so angry, he sent me to live at the Lutheran orphanage in Postman. I never saw the ranch again.
What became of your lamb, Clarice?
I killed him.
You still wake up sometimes, don't you? You wake up in the dark and hear the screaming of the lambs.
Yes.
And you think if you save poor Catherine, you could make them stop, don't you? You think if Catherine lives, you won't wake up in the dark ever again to that awful screaming of the lambs.
I don't know. I don't know.
Thank you, Clarice.
There were criticisms made against the film regarding its treatment of women, particularly the notion that a film essentially about the evisceration and objectification of women would be awarded Best Picture by the Academy Awards. And in a similar vein, members of the transsexual community have protested the film because of its characterization of Buffalo Bill, whose violence some have interpreted as stemming from his sexuality. That's not really how I read it, but did you guys have any thoughts on the potential misogyny or transphobia in the film?
I think Jodie Foster challenges the Scott Glenn character, right, about how she's being treated. And he kind of plays it off that he's kind of treating her badly just because these hick cops then will open up and allow him to do his job where they would naturally be resistant to like federal law enforcement coming in. But she kind of challenges on him and says, that they take their lead from the way you treat me. And if you're going to treat me that way, they're going to think it's all right to treat me that way. And I think she kind of puts him in his place. So I think misogyny is there in the film, but I think it's making a statement about it. I don't think it's pro-misogynist.
Yeah, it's not propping it up in any kind of way.
Yeah, I think that's the point. It's definitely there. The misogyny and the sexism is in the film, but the film is not in itself misogynistic. It's taking things from Clarice Starling's perspective, and a lot of the film is literally taken from her perspective. It's a point of view shot from her as she looks around at all these men in various places, FBI trainees, her bosses, local police officers, members of the psychiatric prison just staring at her, and there is this sort of expression of contempt there that she bristles against.
I guess it's maybe the idea that the people who accuse the film of being misogynistic is that she sort of has to sort of learn, at least from Hannibal and from her boss and all these things. She has to sort of learn from them, but at the same time, I think the film pretty much makes the case that she solves the case by herself, right? So it's I mean, she puts the things together on her own. And she's a nuanced character in the sense that she's vulnerable when she needs to be vulnerable, and she's strong when she needs to be strong, right? So it's a very nuanced performance and a very nuanced character. So I guess the only thing that I could see maybe is that it's still about women being in peril, But I know that there was something about Buffalo Bill being having Nazi stuff in his room, and the fact that he was a transsexual being sort of maybe used as a way to stereotype transsexuals and homosexuals, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think that Lecter's, prognosis of Buffalo Bill is that he is not a transsexual, but rather he is a person who is so tormented in himself that he wants to transform into something else. And that in his mind, the furthest that he can get away from himself is to become a woman. But of course, he's rejected by all the major sex reassignment clinics because he is so psychologically disturbed. And that seems to be the director's reading of the character as well, Jonathan Demme, although he has since added that there is a worrying absence of positive gay characters in movies.
Yeah, and so, I mean, do we know the theme of transformation? It also has something to do with Starling herself, right? She has to also change to become someone who is basically in charge of her own life, right? Of her own career, in this sense. Like, she has to prove herself, but she can only prove herself if she sort of makes these changes within herself as well, right? So
yeah, I would say the moth or butterfly imagery is very indicative of her having to kind of transform during the course of the movie.
Also, bugs. So Greg, I thought that Greg might maybe not like it as much, maybe.
But all the bugs in this are dead.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
No. When she comes into his house, it's.
Oh yeah.
Oh, except for that. Yeah, the ending.
And that's I find.
I have to live in the world, guys. I have to be able to get along. So.
Yeah, that final confrontation with Bill is really scary when she enters the house and is going down all the levels. Again, it's this idea, this sort of descent into hell, and when she sees the woman in the bathtub all sort of melted, and then the lights go out.
Oh, that's
and then you get one of the few point of view shots that isn't from Starling. It's from Buffalo Bill, and he's sort of staring at her in the darkness,
touches her,
terrified and afraid, and just bumbling around, and it's so scary. But in a weird way, we're put in the position of the predator. We're sort of in his skin in that moment, and we're stalking his prey, and it's very nauseating and confronting in terms of filmmaking.
I think it's from his perspective because she is what he wants to be, right? She is what he wants to change into, but he can't do it, and so he has to hesitate. So he hesitates, and then she sort of manages to shoot him. But I think that's what he does, right? He reaches out to touch her and he can't, so he just
Yeah,
I
he
don't know,
reaches
that's-
out
that's-
and then he pulls out
yeah.
the gun and thumps
Yeah, he
back the
cocks
hammer.
his pistol and
Yeah, she hears the
Mhm.
hammer and she
Yeah.
fires. Yeah.
He
I like
survived.
Catherine a lot. The woman that gets kidnapped. I think she's kind of badass too.
Yeah.
So
That must
he's
have been a
not-
horrible acting job. Like
Yeah.
even though it's a movie, you still have to sit in that
Oh, yeah.
role and scream and muster up those feelings of terror. That must have been horrible.
Yeah, that's pretty. It's a pretty claustrophobic film.
I think what's amazing about Lecter is how much he's able to dominate anyone standing outside his cell. You know, technically he's the one in the cage, but he is so with words and just by smelling and just by staring at them and, you know, whispering closer, closer, he's just able to completely undo them. His power of words and understanding of the mind is so just overwhelming to people who come in contact with him.
Yeah. To be honest, the first time I watched the film, I didn't realize at first that when he escapes the cell and Swatcher's faces, I didn't really realize that's what he was going to do. I mean, I just felt like, okay, he's going to probably try to escape via the elevator or something. I mean, at least, you know, he's going to be on the elevator, and then it turns out he wasn't. And yeah, this sort of.
I think that's the point. He's one step ahead of everyone, including the audience.
Yeah, it's also weird because in that scene he reveals that he's actually not different from Buffalo Bill because he still does the same things. It's just he has a bit more sophistication, but
Well, he has more control and he has more patience. Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, but it still doesn't change that he's just doing the same. The base things, like, you know, murdering people in a vicious manner. Like he's not killing them in a nice way. He's not necessarily. He's not like his sophistication.
I'd like to see how that's done.
That's a pretty harsh review of Lecter's methods.
No, he would probably.
Yeah.
He would probably not see it as very, very courteous. So I would probably not. You know, I would probably be on on the meal at some point.
Yeah, it's a moment in the film where we're jolted back into reality and we're reminded what we're actually, you know, being sort of seduced by and being fascinated by. Like Starling, we're being drawn into this character and all his very interesting charisma, but ultimately that's the moment where it's like, no, this guy is a monster with zero empathy and he'll cut you up as soon as look at you, given the chance.
Yeah. But we needed that, I think, as well, because just talking about it is not enough. You have to show what he's doing, because otherwise it's just a lot of, you know, build up with no payoff. And this was a payoff. I don't know exactly why he put the other guy into the moth position there, because it's not his own thing, right? It's the other guy. So was that to just leave a clue to the police? I mean, to solve the case? Or
I think it's just to rattle them, get them to bring in the SWAT, basically, bring in the cavalry, and no one's actually looking at the body on the floor. They're searching everywhere but that room. But well, speaking of serial killers, the film does kind of play on this public fascination with serial killers, which, you know, is a sort of very real and present thing in society or in culture or in media. Did you guys have any thoughts on that at all?
I think that's why I think I prefer the films to the TV show in some aspects, because the TV show makes it seem like these people, you know, you have like 500 serial killers, you know, doing their stuff in the same area in the same week. You know, it's like so many. I don't know. It's and that's why I think the film portrays the hunt for a person like that in a more realistic fashion. Because it takes time, and sometimes these cases don't get solved because, you know, these people are probably not committing these acts all at the same time or in a short amount of time, but over, you know, a long period. So it's probably not very easy to track them, and so it's probably a much more palatable way of presenting it. The other thing is that, you know, these people are actually not that common. They're not. I mean, they don't make up the majority of crimes. These hardcore cases, they draw attention because they are exceptional, because they are outside of what you normally expect. So I guess that's why people are so fascinated by them, because they can't believe, oh my God, Jeffrey Dahmer and all that, and Ted Bundy, these people, they are, they're an exception to the norm. And I just think that, like, it's not like a Batman villain where you have, everyone has their own gimmick, and it's like the murder of the week, like who did it, like the Penguin or the Riddler. No, this is actually, yeah, much more closer to what a real manhunt would look like, I guess. And that's why I think the TV show sometimes is a bit, yeah, they do the monster of the week stuff a bit too much, I guess. That's why.
Yeah, I studied criminal justice for 4 years, and haven't, for those 4 years, I didn't read a mystery book, and I didn't watch any Law and Order, because once you start studying, you find out it's quite different than what's actually presented on television. So yeah.
You mean a court case doesn't take half an hour to get through?
No, and arraignments are not exciting at all.
Arraignments.